Hello everyone, my name is Brian and welcome back to Barb's Basement. It's been at least a couple of weeks since my last Star Wars Legacy video came out. Look, the world just kept ending and Barb finally let me out of the basement just to watch a little bit of news with my jaw on the floor and anyways, I guess on to more important things like Star Wars Legacy. This week's issue is probably one of my absolute all-time favorites of the series. One of the more interesting aspects of this comic run is the state of the galaxy after the Vong War. After the big three are long gone, after the Jedi have completely re-established themselves as the guardians of democracy in the galaxy far, far away, probably one of the more fascinating aspects of this entire comic run to me is the complete and total, public rehabilitation of the Imperial Remnant. They just call themselves the Empire, but you get it. In previous weeks, we've talked about the Empire's Victory Without War initiative, which sought to aid planets that had been devastated by the Vong War. After the end of the Galactic Civil War, obviously people were a bit peeved at the idea of the Empire coming back into major galactic politics. Jagged fell, and presumably the mother of his children, Jaina Solo, fan theory, also extremely obvious, used the Empire as a force for good, helping out marginalized populations and bringing back entire systems into the Empire without having to start an actual war. All of this is just to attest to how devastating it was when the Ossus Project backfired. Seemingly, the Yuuzhan Vong had conquest back on the menu, and it was all the faults of the Jedi and the government that supported them. This shook the Galactic Alliance to its core. I don't think a lot of people really understand just how devastating the Yuuzhan Vong War was. I mean, I'm talking trillions of people were killed in what amounts to genocide. I mean, if you think about the Yuuzhan Vong were a race, they were a species that were actively killing off large swaths of populations in the galaxy, or enslaving them, so literally just committing galactic-wide genocide. So obviously a lot of people in the galaxy were not very hot on the idea of the Yuuzhan Vong being rehabilitated and brought back into the galactic fold. If the people were considering leaving the Galactic Alliance before for the Empire, their minds had certainly been made up now. With that one spark of hate and fear came war, and quickly shifting alliances. This week's issue picks up right at the end of that conflict, days before the Massacre of Ossus. In the Imperial War Room, Roan Fel, the Emperor, and Moff Nina Calixte oversee the Battle of Camas, the most pivotal battle in the Sith Imperial War. As the battle rages on, Moff Calixte feigns surprise as Emperor Fel asks if she's pleased with her war. Here's where we learn about the big lie told to the galaxy and Imperial citizens. Roan uncovered all too late the real reason for the war. It was all orchestrated by not only the Sith, but Moff Calixte, Moff Veed, and the Moff Council. Fel admits that it was not only the Empire, but also the Galactic Alliance that defeated the Yuuzhan Vong. He deduces that it was in fact always a plan to sabotage the Ossus Project with the help of the Sith. Many on the High Moff Council called the project an act of war and issued an ultimatum: either end the Ossus Project or risk all-out war. The GA and the Jedi gave them a resounding F off, kicking off a galaxy-spanning conflict. The Yuuzhan Vong were in fact framed, just as the Jedi and the Galactic Alliance had assumed all along. Moff Veed was a little too thirsty over the idea of an all-out war, and was ready to manipulate the Empire into mass-scale conflict. Obviously the one Sith had reached out to Calixte first. I mean, just look at the smug look on her face. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Instead of bringing the Sith's offer to the head honcho, the big cheese, the Emperor himself, she brought it to her lover, Morlish Veed. The Sith waited in the shadows, pulling the strings of the war machine of the Empire, and waited until the conflict was in full force to offer their allegiance. A dark to balance at the light, the Sith versus the Jedi. Galactic Alliance had the foresight and the abilities of the Jedi, and now the Empire had the Sith, which Calixte had manipulated the Empire and maneuvered things to make it so they really had no choice but to accept. She had betrayed her emperor in a real King's Landing move. Her first loyalty was supposed to be to her emperor, but she rebukes that sentiment. Her loyalty was always to the Empire first, and obviously Roan disagrees with that. She's only been faithful to herself this entire time. She tells Roan that his only real concern was that someone would betray him and replace him on the throne, but I mean, if you think about it, was he really wrong? I mean, he's literally being stabbed in the back as we speak. In anger, Roan tells her that this is his empire and that she has committed treason. Calixte is simply saying and doing what all the Moffs are thinking, and that she has some very powerful allies with the Sith. Roan, however, knows they can't be trusted. I mean, just look at their history. I mean, come on. They will simply use her and the rest of the Moff Council until their plans have come to fruition. Then they will all die once they are no longer useful. To her credit, she has thought all of this through. The Sith will need the Empire for its military might, and they will need the bones of the Galactic Alliance for its bureaucracy to run the political arm of the galaxy. They will always need her. But why would the Sith need an Emperor who never embraced them in the first place? Masterclass. Not only that, but if he strikes her down now in their moment of victory, is he really all that different from the Sith that he hates so much? Before Fel is really able to weigh his options, Grand Admiral Moralish Veed appears on the holocom. The war has been won, and to prevent further loss of life, the Empire has accepted the surrender of the Galactic Alliance. The war is over. Not only that, the crown jewel of the Galactic Alliance, Coruscant, can no longer be militarily defended. However, there is still the matter of the Jedi. Certainly, the Jedi will never submit to an Empire, especially one that's in the league with the one Sith. Calixte doesn't seem bothered. The Jedi will have no choice. Fel tells her that she doesn't understand the Jedi. They have been destroyed by the Empire before, and he will not allow it to happen again. He orders that they be allowed to leave the Jedi Temple on Coruscant and take refuge on the ancient Jedi planet of Ossus. Ultimately, and unfortunately for them, we know their fate will remain the same regardless. While many Jedi died on the ancient world of Ossus, many survived. Look, out of all the Jedi purges, this one has to be the most poorly executed. A lot of the Sith Imperial strategy was just the hope that the Jedi would be broken enough that they really couldn't muster much of a meaningful resistance, but this Jedi purge was nowhere near as effective as Order 66, with them estimating that like roughly half of the Jedi survived.
I pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
The Sith got too eager and barely waited for most of the Jedi to arrive at Ossus, as a lot of them were scattered throughout the galaxy fighting the war. The Empire really had the upper hand in this entire situation. With an iron fist rule over galactic politics and the one Sith as the dominant Force sect, they were primed to take out all of the Jedi in one stroke. Darth Maladi did not see it that way. The war was long and brutal with mass casualties on both sides. If all the Jedi had been in Ossus, they would have been more difficult to defeat. Shattered and without leadership from Grandmaster Cole Skywalker, they would have to go into hiding, which would give the one Sith more time to prepare. Calixte knew that this was going to be the least of their problems. The current Emperor was not going to be happy with the massacre. Officially, this was supposed to be a diplomatic mission to try and convince the Jedi to join the Empire, which may have been the dumbest excuse ever conceived. Who in their right mind would think that the Jedi would join a fascist state with the Sith as their main religion? Now here's where we see a really interesting growing divide in the New Order. None of the Moff Council was consulted before the massacre and the assault on Ossus, a total surprise to both them and the Emperor. Now this is where the grand plan comes in. All of the Moffs agreed that Roan Fel would need to be replaced by someone new. He was never in full support of the Sith Imperial War with the Jedi and the GA. Worse, he knew it was all based on a big lie. If it wasn't obvious that he didn't trust the Sith in the first place, the fact that he had barred his Imperial Knights from even fighting in the war proved it. Maladi informed Veed and Calixte that it would be in their best interest to feign surprise. The Sith would be attending the Moff Council. Soon there would be someone new on the throne. Moralish believes that he is going to sit on the throne, just as they had always planned. Calixte, however, is furious. She wasn't informed about the attack on Ossus beforehand. Even Moralish didn't tell her, despite the fact that they are partners. He agrees. She is his partner, and a formidable one at that, and he's exceptionally lucky that she never wanted to be on the Imperial throne herself. Now, Calixte is a very smart woman. She knows that the true power is in the lies and the deception she uses. The power is behind the throne. Why be so out in the open and exposed when you can pull all of the strings from behind? Finally, she confesses, the Sith really make her uncomfortable. I wonder why a bunch of death cultists from an ancient religion would make her uncomfortable. Moralish rightfully calls out the hypocrisy of the situation, telling her that it's a little late to back out on this plan now. Calixte states the obvious. Maladi never actually said that it would be Moralish who sat the throne once Fel was overthrown. Moralish, being very pompous and up his own ass, says that none on the Moff Council are qualified to lead the Empire. Who else could there be? Darth Krayt intensifies. Maladi knows that if they chose someone else, the Moff Council would just depose them. The Sith need them. Calixte, ever the optimist, skeptically responds, they need us thus far. Moralish Veed is more of like a glass half full of blue milk guy, insists that this is a big victory for them. The following day, in the private chambers of the current Emperor Roan Fel, he meets with his very competent and very Force-sensitive Imperial Knights. Morgan Fel cautions his cousin that he's playing a risky game of sabacc with this planned meeting. Roan dismisses the cautious attitude of his cousin. He knows the Moff Council and the hardliners of the Empire as well. They want order, and who better to give them order than the true Emperor. They may have scoffed at Roan's victory without war initiative, but they would never stand for outright disobedience. The Empire still loved their traditions. At this point, the Sith were way too entrenched with the Empire, and there was no feasible way to divest them from each other now. However, they could still kill Veed if he made any suspicious moves, and they could also kill Calixte while they're at it. Shockingly, in a room full of fully trained Imperial Knights, they didn't sense a woman standing behind a curtain. A regular old curtain. Maybe the curtain was made out of Yislamari blood or something. To their credit, the Knights are quick on the draw, and before she can blink an eye, she's off the ground and making friends with the closest wall. Roan laments the fact that he didn't kill her when he had the chance, and that may have been a mistake. Arrogantly, she says that killing her now would be an even bigger mistake. Morgan shouts that she may have overheard their plans. Dude, she was behind a curtain in the same room. Of course she heard your plans. With her eyes and ears everywhere, she admits that she already knew their plan was to arrest Veed, and even worse, she knows of a plot to kill the Emperor. Draco doesn't trust her at face value. She could be making up the entire plot just to save her life. Thel, having a cooler head, tells Draco that she would have been in zero danger if she hadn't come here in the first place. As she gets back to her feet, she divulges the Sith's plot to destroy the Jedi. The Emperor. The Sith plan to crash the Moff Council and to assassinate Roan Fel. She doesn't know how many of them are coming, she just knows that their only hope of survival is to escape. Fel is understandably suspicious. She was just rubbing in his face that she had facilitated the deal with the Sith, and there was nothing he could do about it. Fel assumed that Morlish Veed would be named the new Emperor, and the last thing that Veed and Calixte would want is for the actual Emperor to be out roaming the galaxy. Unless the obvious happens. They are going to name Crate the new Emperor, and by extension, Veed and herself would be a liability, not an asset. Crate would never be able to crush the entire galaxy under his heel if a large portion of it was still loyal to the true Emperor. Her only hope is to fracture the Imperial might and to create a demand for their services in the New Order. His survival was the best insurance plan for everyone involved, and that was enough to make them fast friends. Roan knew that unfortunately, they would be expecting a contingent of Imperial Knights to attend the meeting along with the Emperor. That meant that his cousin would need to accompany a body double to the meeting to curb any suspicions. Morgan, being very boastful, has always wanted to test his skills against a true Sith Lord. Roan, with a pat on the shoulder, warns him not to underestimate them. With that, Calixte takes her leave, telling the group that a shuttle awaits for them in the lower levels. If they take the maintenance tunnels from the Senate chambers, they should be able to make it there safely. Roan, showing his good nature, warns Calixte that the Sith will know that he has escaped. It can only be because someone with knowledge of the assassination plot warned him. Stoically, she tells him that if the plan fails, she's dead anyways. Regardless, she's had luck in the past shielding her true nature from Force users. Obviously, if she brings that curtain, everything should be just fine. Next, we cut back to a familiar scene, one that we've seen before but with added context, as the Moff Council and the Emperor's body double hold a meeting to discuss the end of the war. To maintain peace and stability, the Empire will keep the Galactic Alliance bureaucracy in place for the time being. Most importantly, the Jedi Order has been broken. The remaining Jedi have been scattered throughout the galaxy, leaving them with no central leadership and no safe haven. Pretending to be surprised, Veed announces the intrusion of the One Sith, being led by none other than the elusive Darth Crate. In the Undercity, the true Emperor and Draco are fleeing to their shuttle. Antares, ever the romantic, asks, what about Marcia? She will meet them on Bastion, the most highly secured planet in the Empire, once they've made it free of Coruscant space. Now this is actually an ironically hilarious moment for me. As we see Roan and Antares fighting their own battle, we see the Emperor's cousin get absolutely bodied by Crate. Like, he barely even tries. After my man talked all that shit, they really did him like that. It makes you wonder, is Crate that good, or are Imperial Knights just that bad? But just then, Roan and Draco feel in the Force all the Imperial Knights, including Morgan, are dead. They serve their purpose for a higher cause. In true Imperial fashion, Roan doesn't miss a beat and is back on the run. Back in the throne room, the obvious happens. Crate declares himself the Emperor, the galaxy is broken, just coming out of a massive war. But to be fair, when isn't it? It needs a man of vision, a strong Emperor like Crate. Calixte's worst nightmare has come to fruition. She's in danger. Massive amounts of danger. And danger finds her quicker than she may have anticipated, as Darth Maladi catches her off guard in her own living quarters. The Sith saw right through the act, and even worse for Moff Calixte, they sensed her treachery. I guess she didn't bring that curtain with her. Now, for those of you who aren't super well versed in the lore of the post-Endor legends, things got pretty wild after the collapse of the Empire. Various Moffs became warlords of huge sections of space, all fighting over who was actually in charge, or fighting with planetary defense forces. It took years for the New Republic to bring order back to the galaxy in the first place. Now Darth Maladai, very smart cookie, is fully aware of that, and the Sith by their very nature are very small in number. Sure, they may be Legion by comparison to former Sith sects, but there is no way they could run the galaxy without the Moff Council. They would need to avoid another post-Endor Imperial Civil War situation. Calixte has masterfully outplayed the One Sith in this situation. With Fel on the loose, large chunks of the Imperial military will still be loyal to the true Empire. Even worse, some Moffs may change their tone on who they are backing for the throne. Maladai wonders aloud, if she were to dissect Calixte's brain, would she learn the truth? Calixte insists that the two of them are better off as allies since their interests, for the moment, align. Maladai squashes that train of thought. This really signifies the changing ideology among the Empire. Before, it was all about political power and backstabbing to reach the upper echelons of Imperial society. Now, it is all about your value to the One Sith and their very extreme beliefs. If you serve no greater purpose for Krayt or his whims, you will be discarded. Dark times, indeed. With that, Moff Calixte mutters under her breath, the downfall of the One Sith will be their arrogance. They are no different from Sidious, and that will be the knife that kills them. Well, everyone, that about does it for this week's episode of Barb's Basement. I promise you that I am not going to disappear into a cellar for another year. Barb has promised to help me out of the basement once a week to read comics, and maybe even twice a week if some greater Star Wars news pops up. By the way, make sure you check out our last video on the Knights of Ren being active during the original Trilogy era. Some really weird, interesting stuff happening there. If you aren't already down here with us, subscribe and join us here in Barb's Basement.